You just spent 2 hours with someone. You talked. You laughed at the right moments. You nodded when you were supposed to. And now, you're home. And somehow, you feel worse than before you left. Not angry, not exactly sad, just emptier. Like something was taken from you, but you cannot name what it was. Most people do not notice this feeling. They hang out. They go home. They move on. But you do not move on. You sit there, replaying the whole thing, trying to figure out why being with that person made you feel more alone than actually being alone. This video is about that feeling, and it is about the people who create it, because loneliness is not always about having no one. Sometimes the deepest loneliness happens when someone is sitting right in front of you. They are talking. You are answering. The conversation keeps moving, but nothing they say reaches you, and nothing you say seems to land either. They are not being openly cruel. They are not trying to hurt you. But somehow, every word you offer disappears into the air. You leave feeling like you were never fully there. That is not a small thing, and if you have felt it more than once with the same person, it is probably not random. Something is happening. Maybe you know this moment already. Someone asks how you have been, and this time you answer honestly. Not the polished version, not the quick version, the real version. You mention something you have been carrying, something difficult, something true. And before you even finish the sentence, they move on. No pause, no follow-up, no real response. Just a quick shift back to something easier, something lighter, usually something about them. That moment passes fast. But if you are the kind of person who notices emotional detail, you feel it immediately. The door just closed. Your words stopped mattering. And most people will tell you not to make too much of that. Maybe they did not know what to say. Maybe you were expecting too much. Maybe it was just an awkward moment. Sometimes that is true. But when the same thing keeps happening with the same person, it stops being awkwardness. It becomes a pattern. And patterns teach you something. They teach you where you can be real and where you cannot. There are people who leave you feeling lighter after time together. You do not have to perform with them. You do not have to edit yourself. You do not have to calculate the mood of the room every 5 seconds. You can say something messy. You can pause. You can be quiet without rushing to fill the silence. You leave feeling more like yourself. Then there is the other kind. The kind that looks normal from the outside. You talked. You spent time together. There was no fight. Maybe there was even laughter. But underneath it, you were doing all the work. You were softening your tone. You were keeping things easy. You were translating yourself into a version they could receive. You were making sure the conversation stayed comfortable. And they may not even realize you were doing it. That is why this kind of loneliness is so confusing. Nothing dramatic happened, but you still came home feeling empty. Because emptiness is not always caused by conflict. Sometimes it comes from being half seen for too long. Some people make you lonely in very specific ways. The first kind only listens for their turn. They look engaged. They nod. They make all the right sounds. But you can feel it. They are not really with you. They are waiting. Waiting for their story. Waiting for their opinion. Waiting for the conversation to return to familiar territory. You speak, but it feels like your words are being held in a waiting room. The second kind only responds to what fits their world. If you say something they relate to, they come alive. If you talk about something that sits outside their frame, the energy drops immediately. You can actually feel the shift. Their eyes glaze over. their curiosity disappears. The conversation gets redirected into safer territory. You do not feel rejected exactly. You just feel filtered. The third kind makes you edit yourself before you even speak. This one is subtle. They may be kind, they may even care about you, but something in their presence tells you not to go too deep, not to be too complicated, not to say it the way you actually feel it. So you shorten the story. You leave out the part that mattered most. You turn something honest into something easier to digest. And by the end of the interaction, it barely sounds like you anymore. That is one of the loneliest feelings there is. Not silence. Silence would be easier. It is the illusion of being heard while being completely missed. If you have felt this before, you may have blamed yourself. Maybe I said too much. Maybe I am too intense. Maybe I need to be easier to be around. But consider something else. Maybe the problem is not that you show up too much. Maybe the problem is that you keep showing up fully for people who only meet you halfway. That imbalance changes you over time. Because when someone keeps failing to meet you, you do not just stay the same. You adapt. You start speaking in safer versions. You stop mentioning the thing that actually matters. You become more careful, more edited, more convenient. And after enough of that, you stop feeling lonely only around them. You start carrying that loneliness into other places too. This is why certain relationships leave a strange mark on you. Not because the person is evil, not because they meant to do damage, but because being around them teaches your nervous system a quiet lesson. Do not expect to be received here. That lesson has a cost. You see their name on your phone and feel tired before you even answer. You make plans with them and already feel yourself preparing. You tell yourself it will be fine. Then you come home and feel that same emptiness again. That is not drama. That is your body remembering. A lot of people do not understand this because they measure relationships by contact. How often do you talk? How long have you known each other? How much time do you spend together? But that is not how you measure connection. You measure it by presence, by whether someone actually meets what you say, by whether your honesty has somewhere to land, by whether you leave feeling fuller or smaller. That is why you notice things other people brush past. You notice the exact second your truth becomes inconvenient. You notice when someone asks a question but does not really want the answer. You notice when warmth is present, but receiving is absent. That does not make you weak. It means your system is built to register depth, and that comes with a cost. Because some people can move through shallow interactions all day and feel fine. They talk, they leave, they forget. You do not. You remember how the interaction felt. You remember the moment the energy changed. You remember when you stopped feeling real in the room. This is not because you are fragile. It is because you are paying attention. And sometimes, paying attention is exhausting. There is a specific kind of person who can make this worse without ever looking like the villain. They are not openly dismissive. They are not obviously cold. They just take up all the emotional space without realizing it. The conversation bends toward them, their updates, their feelings, their interpretations, their way of seeing the world. And when it is finally your turn, it feels strangely narrow. You can speak, but not too long, not too deeply, not in a way that changes the shape of the room. So you start compressing yourself. That is the word for it, compression. You fold yourself smaller so the interaction can keep working. You simplify what you mean. You skip the details. You leave out the vulnerable part because you already know it will not land. And eventually, you start confusing their limitation with your worth. If they did not ask, maybe it was not important. If they did not respond, maybe it was too much. If they changed the subject, maybe you should have stayed lighter. But none of that is true. You were not too much. They just were not able to meet you there. And when someone cannot meet you there, but you keep trying anyway, you begin to shrink, quietly, gradually, without even noticing it at first. Until one day, you realize there are entire parts of yourself you no longer bring into the relationship. Not because you made some dramatic decision, because your body learned it was pointless. Sometimes the hardest version of this is when the person is close to you. Family, an old friend, a partner, someone you are supposed to feel safe with. That is where it gets painful, because you cannot easily dismiss it, and you may not want to leave. And maybe they really do love you in the only way they know how. But it still costs you something. Every time you leave them feeling worse, trust changes a little. You open up less. You protect more. You stop arriving with the same hope. Not because you became cold, because something in you is trying to survive the disappointment. Some relationships do not attack you. They just never really receive you. That kind of loneliness is hard to explain, especially when the other person looks harmless, especially when everyone else thinks they are nice. But nice is not the same as nourishing, and familiar is not the same as safe. That matters. If this is bringing someone to mind right now, stay with that. Someone you see regularly, someone you are supposed to feel close to, someone who leaves you feeling heavier every time. No obvious crime, no huge betrayal, just that same quiet emptiness after every interaction. If that is real for you, leave a word in the comments. Just one word. Not to explain it, just to mark it. Sometimes naming a pattern is the first step towards seeing it clearly. Now, here is the deeper truth. Some relationships make you feel more alone than being alone ever could. That is not cynical. It is accurate. When you are alone, at least you are not being edited. At least you are not waiting to be met. At least you are not spending energy on someone who cannot receive what you are actually giving. But when you are with someone who keeps missing you, the loneliness gets louder. Because now it is not just absence, it is absence in the middle of company. And that is harder to carry. If this resonates, it does not automatically mean you need to cut people off. It does not mean every difficult relationship needs a dramatic ending. But it may mean something simpler. It may mean you need to stop asking certain people for forms of connection they have never really been able to give. That shift matters, because once you stop expecting depth from someone who only offers surface, your energy changes. You stop over-explaining yourself. You stop arriving with the same hope. You stop calling disappointment a surprise. And that is not bitterness. It is clarity. You begin to understand the difference between people who truly meet you and people who only occupy space near you. That difference can change your whole life, because the people who make you feel lonelier are not always loud about it. Sometimes they smile the whole time. Sometimes they are pleasant. Sometimes they are familiar. Sometimes they even mean well. But you feel the gap anyway. You feel the place where your words should have landed. You feel yourself becoming quieter, smaller, more careful. That is not paranoia. That is your system picking up on something real. And if you have always been the kind of person who notices this, while others seem perfectly fine, that does not mean something is wrong with you. It may simply mean you are not built for half connection. You feel the full weight of presence and the full weight of its absence. That is not a weakness. It is a different way of moving through the world. So, here is where I will leave you. You are not imagining it. You are not overreacting, and you are not asking for too much. You are just someone who can feel the difference between being with a person and being seen by one. A lot of people never learn that difference. You always have. And that does not make you broken. It means you have been measuring connection more honestly than most people ever do. If this put words to something you have felt for a long time, share it with someone who might need it, or leave a comment. Sometimes a feeling starts becoming bearable the moment it is finally named.